The Strait of Hormuz is considered the most strategically important oil transit route in the world, and its importance comes from both its geography and the massive amount of energy resources that move through it every single day. This narrow waterway lies between Iran and Oman and serves as the only sea passage connecting the oil-rich Persian Gulf with the open waters of the Arabian Sea and the wider global shipping network. Countries like Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Iraq, and Qatar rely heavily on this route to export their oil and natural gas to international markets. On average, around 18 to 20 million barrels of crude oil pass through the Strait of Hormuz each day, which accounts for nearly 1/5 of the world's total oil consumption. That means a huge portion of the global economy depends on the safe and uninterrupted flow of tankers through this single corridor of water. The strait itself is only about 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point, and the actual shipping lanes used by oil tankers are even smaller, making the route extremely vulnerable to disruption during times of political or military tension. Because of this geographic reality, any threat to the Strait of Hormuz immediately sends shockwaves across global energy markets. Even rumors of instability or possible blockades can cause oil prices to rise rapidly as traders anticipate supply disruptions. Many major economies such as China, Japan, South Korea, and several European nations depend heavily on oil shipments that pass through this route, meaning that any interruption would not only affect Middle Eastern producers, but also industries, transportation systems, and energy supplies across the entire world. For decades, global powers have maintained a strong military presence in and around the Persian Gulf, largely to ensure that this critical waterway remains open and secure for international trade. Naval patrols, surveillance operations, and multinational security efforts have often focused specifically on protecting commercial vessels traveling through the Strait of Hormuz because of its enormous economic significance. When tensions rise between regional powers, the strait instantly becomes the center of global attention, as governments, energy companies, and financial markets closely monitor the situation to understand whether the world's most important oil artery will remain open or face disruption. The recent escalation in tensions between Iran, the United States, and Israel did not happen overnight. It developed after a series of military and political confrontations that gradually pushed the region toward a dangerous breaking point. The situation intensified when coordinated airstrikes and military operations targeted strategic Iranian military facilities, including missile bases and infrastructure, believed to be connected to Iran's regional defense network. These strikes were widely interpreted as a joint effort by the United States and Israel to weaken Iran's military capabilities and limit its ability to support allied groups across the Middle East. The attacks reportedly hit multiple locations linked to the Iranian military and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which plays a central role in Iran's defense strategy and regional operations. Following the strikes, the reaction from Tehran was swift and intense. Iranian officials condemned the attacks as a direct act of aggression and warned that such actions would not go unanswered. Political leaders and military commanders in Iran declared that the country had the right to defend its sovereignty and respond to any threat against its territory. This response significantly raised fears that the confrontation could quickly expand beyond isolated strikes and turn into a broader, regional conflict. Iranian state media and military sources began issuing statements suggesting that retaliation could come in multiple forms, including missile strikes, drone operations, cyber warfare, and economic pressure on global trade routes. One of the most sensitive aspects of Iran's response involved signaling that strategic waterways and international shipping routes could become part of the confrontation. The Strait of Hormuz, which lies directly along Iran's southern coastline, instantly became a central point of concern for global energy markets and international security analysts. Iranian officials hinted that if the pressure from Washington and Tel Aviv continued, Iran could use its geographic advantage to influence the movement of oil tankers passing through the strait. Because so many energy exports from the Persian Gulf rely on this narrow passage, even the suggestion of interference was enough to trigger widespread concern among governments and investors around the world. At the same time, military activity in the region began increasing noticeably. The United States moved additional naval assets closer to the Persian Gulf, including warships designed to protect commercial shipping and monitor Iranian naval movements. Israel also heightened its military readiness, reinforcing air defense systems and increasing intelligence surveillance in anticipation of possible retaliation. Analysts warned that with so many military forces operating in such a confined region, even a small miscalculation could spark a larger confrontation involving multiple countries. Inside Iran, public messaging from political leaders emphasized national unity and resistance against foreign pressure. Officials argued that the strikes represented a violation of international norms and framed the conflict as part of a broader struggle for regional influence and sovereignty. Meanwhile, international diplomatic channels were flooded with urgent discussions as global powers attempted to prevent the situation from spiraling into open warfare. Diplomatic efforts from European countries, regional governments, and international organizations focused on urging restraint from all sides while trying to prevent further military escalation. The crisis quickly moved beyond a purely military confrontation and began affecting economic and geopolitical calculations around the world. Energy markets reacted sharply as investors worried that continued conflict could threaten oil production and transportation across the Gulf region. Governments that rely heavily on Middle Eastern oil started closely monitoring the situation, understanding that any disruption could affect fuel prices, industrial production, and economic stability. As tensions remained high and military forces continued operating in close proximity, the possibility of further retaliation or counterstrikes remained one of the most serious concerns for policymakers and security experts observing the rapidly evolving situation in the Middle East. One of the most alarming developments in this crisis has been Iran's warning that it could restrict or even block oil shipments moving through the Strait of Hormuz. This warning carries enormous weight because Iran sits directly along the northern coast of this narrow waterway and has significant military capabilities positioned in the surrounding region. Over the years, Iran has developed a strategy designed specifically for controlling or disrupting traffic in this area during times of conflict. The country's naval forces, particularly the Navy of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, have built a large presence in the Persian Gulf with fast attack boats, anti-ship missiles, naval mines, drones, and coastal defense systems that could potentially threaten commercial tankers and military vessels passing through the strait. Iranian officials have repeatedly stated that if their country's oil exports are blocked by sanctions or military pressure, then other nations should not expect to freely export their own oil through the same waterway. This statement reflects a strategic doctrine that focuses on economic retaliation rather than direct large-scale confrontation. By threatening to disrupt shipping routes, Iran can create global economic pressure that extends far beyond the battlefield. The mere possibility of interference with tanker traffic can immediately affect oil markets, insurance costs for shipping companies, and international trade routes. Oil companies and maritime transport firms often become extremely cautious when tensions rise in the Strait of Hormuz, because even small incidents such as drone surveillance, warning shots, or naval harassment can create serious risks for massive oil tankers carrying millions of barrels of crude. Iran has also conducted numerous naval exercises in the Persian Gulf over the past decade to demonstrate its ability to control strategic maritime corridors. These exercises often involve missile launches from coastal batteries, swarm tactics using multiple fast patrol boats, and simulated attacks on large vessels. Military analysts believe these drills are designed to show that Iran could quickly disrupt commercial shipping if it chose to escalate the situation. Because the shipping lanes inside the strait are extremely narrow and heavily trafficked, even a limited disruption could slow or halt tanker movement for days or weeks. Mines placed in the water, for example, would require extensive clearing operations before shipping could safely resume, which would significantly delay oil deliveries to global markets. Another major factor behind Iran's warnings involves economic leverage. Iran understands that many major economies rely heavily on energy supplies that pass through the Strait of Hormuz. Countries such as China, India, Japan, and South Korea import large volumes of oil from Persian Gulf producers, and any interruption in tanker traffic could create immediate supply concerns for these nations. By signaling that it might restrict shipping routes, Iran sends a message not only to the United States and Israel, but also to global markets and international governments that have an interest in maintaining stable energy supplies. This kind of pressure can influence diplomatic negotiations, as countries affected by rising oil prices may push for de-escalation or mediation. Military observers also point out that Iran's approach often relies on ambiguity rather than direct closure of the strait. Instead of officially announcing a blockade, the country could create conditions that make commercial shipping extremely risky. Increased naval patrols, missile tests near shipping lanes, drone monitoring of tankers, and warnings issued to foreign vessels can all create uncertainty for ship captains and energy companies. Insurance premiums for vessels traveling through the region could rise sharply, and some shipping firms might temporarily avoid the route altogether. This indirect pressure can reduce oil traffic without requiring a full military confrontation. The strategic geography of the region further strengthens Iran's position in such a scenario. Several small islands, coastal bases, and military installations located near the entrance of the Strait of Hormuz allow Iranian forces to monitor and potentially control movements through the corridor. Anti-ship missile systems deployed along the coastline can reach shipping lanes, while radar installations provide surveillance across large portions of the Gulf. These capabilities mean that any conflict in the region would likely involve not just naval forces, but also air defenses, missile systems, and electronic warfare operations designed to control access to the strait. International reactions to these warnings have been immediate and serious. Many countries have increased naval patrols in nearby waters to ensure that commercial shipping remains protected. The United States and several allied nations maintain fleets in the region specifically tasked with safeguarding maritime trade routes and responding to threats against oil tankers. These naval operations include escort missions, surveillance flights, and coordination with commercial shipping companies to monitor potential risks. The presence of multiple military forces operating close to one another in such a confined waterway increases the complexity of the situation and raises concerns about accidental confrontations or misunderstandings at sea. The possibility of disruption in the Strait of Hormuz immediately sends shockwaves through global energy markets because this narrow waterway serves as one of the most important supply routes for oil and liquefied natural gas. Energy traders, financial institutions, and governments constantly monitor developments in this region because even the smallest sign of instability can rapidly influence global oil prices. When tensions rise or when threats are made against shipping routes, oil traders begin reacting within minutes by adjusting supply expectations and purchasing futures contracts in anticipation of possible shortages. This reaction often causes oil prices to spike sharply, sometimes within a matter of hours, as markets begin factoring in the risk of reduced supply from the Persian Gulf. The global oil market operates on a delicate balance between supply and demand, and the Strait of Hormuz plays a central role in maintaining that balance. Every day, millions of barrels of crude oil produced by countries such as Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iraq, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates travel through this route before reaching refineries and energy hubs across Asia, Europe, and North America. If tankers are delayed or prevented from moving through the strait, even temporarily, it can quickly reduce the available supply of oil in international markets. When supply tightens while demand remains strong, prices begin rising almost immediately. This increase in oil prices does not remain limited to the energy sector. It spreads throughout the entire global economy. Higher oil prices directly affect transportation costs, which in turn influence the prices of goods and services worldwide. Airlines face higher fuel costs, shipping companies pay more for transporting cargo, and trucking industries experience rising operational expenses. These increased costs eventually reach consumers in the form of higher prices for everyday products, from groceries and electronics to clothing and household goods. Economists often warn that major disruptions in oil supply can trigger inflationary pressure across multiple sectors of the economy, forcing governments and central banks to respond with economic policies aimed at stabilizing markets. Financial markets also react strongly to such crises. Investors closely track energy prices because sudden increases can create uncertainty for industries that depend heavily on fuel, such as manufacturing, aviation, and global logistics. Stock markets sometimes experience volatility during major geopolitical tensions in the Middle East because investors fear that prolonged conflict could weaken economic growth. Energy companies, on the other hand, may experience temporary gains in their stock prices when oil prices surge, as higher prices often increase their potential revenues. This dynamic creates a complex chain reaction throughout global financial systems whenever threats emerge around critical oil supply routes. Another major concern involves the role of long-term energy contracts and strategic reserves. Many countries maintain emergency oil reserves specifically designed to protect their economies from sudden supply disruptions. Governments may release these reserves into the market if shipping routes become blocked or if oil exports from major producers are interrupted. However, these reserves are usually intended for short-term stabilization and cannot permanently replace the massive daily flow of oil that normally travels through the Strait of Hormuz. If the disruption were to continue for an extended period, countries would eventually face significant pressure to find alternative supply sources or reduce consumption. Shipping companies and maritime insurers also play a major role during such crises. When the risk level in the Persian Gulf increases, insurance premiums for oil tankers passing through the region can rise dramatically. Insurers assess the potential dangers associated with missile threats, naval confrontations, drone surveillance, and possible mine deployments in the water. Higher insurance costs make transportation more expensive, and some shipping companies may decide to delay voyages or reroute vessels to avoid entering high-risk zones. These decisions further complicate the global oil supply chain and contribute to rising energy prices. Global leaders and economic analysts often warn that energy shocks caused by geopolitical conflicts can have long-lasting consequences for international stability. Countries that rely heavily on imported oil may experience trade imbalances and currency pressure if energy costs remain high for extended periods. Developing economies are particularly vulnerable because higher fuel prices can strain government budgets and increase the cost of electricity, transportation, and industrial production. In such situations, the economic effects of a regional conflict can spread far beyond the Middle East, influencing markets, industries, and households across nearly every continent. As tensions in the Persian Gulf increased and the possibility of disruption in the Strait of Hormuz became more serious, several countries began strengthening their military presence in the region to protect international shipping routes. Among the most active forces involved in these operations is the Navy of the United States Navy, which has maintained a powerful presence in the Middle East for decades, specifically to ensure that commercial vessels can move safely through critical waterways. When threats emerge around the Strait of Hormuz, the United States typically deploys additional naval assets, such as aircraft carriers, guided missile destroyers, surveillance aircraft, and maritime patrol units to monitor the situation and deter potential attacks on shipping. Aircraft carriers play a particularly significant role in these deployments because they function as floating military bases capable of launching fighter jets, reconnaissance aircraft, and defensive patrols across vast areas of ocean. Carrier strike groups often include several support ships equipped with advanced radar systems, missile defense technology, and anti-submarine capabilities. These groups allow the United States and its allies to maintain constant surveillance over the Persian Gulf and respond quickly if commercial vessels face threats from missiles, drones, or hostile naval activity. The presence of such forces also acts as a signal to adversaries that international shipping routes will be defended. In addition to American forces, several allied nations have also contributed naval units to regional security missions designed to protect tanker traffic. Multinational maritime security initiatives have been created in recent years to coordinate patrols, intelligence sharing, and escort operations for commercial ships passing through the strait. One of the most well-known initiatives is the International Maritime Security Construct, a coalition effort involving multiple countries working together to ensure freedom of navigation in the Persian Gulf and nearby waters. These operations involve joint patrols, communication networks between military and civilian vessels, and coordinated responses to suspicious maritime activity. A major focus of these naval deployments is escorting oil tankers and commercial cargo ships as they pass through high-risk areas. In some situations, military ships accompany tankers through the most sensitive parts of the waterway to reduce the risk of harassment, interception, or attack. These escort missions require careful coordination because the Strait of Hormuz is one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world, with hundreds of vessels moving through the area each week. Naval commanders must balance the need for security with the challenge of maintaining safe navigation in a crowded maritime corridor. Surveillance and intelligence gathering also play a central role in these security operations. Military aircraft, drones, and satellite systems constantly monitor the region to detect potential threats before they escalate into direct confrontations. Radar systems aboard warships track vessel movements, while reconnaissance aircraft observe naval activity along coastlines and near strategic islands. These monitoring efforts help commanders understand the evolving situation and provide early warnings if suspicious movements or military preparations are detected. Another important component of the military buildup involves missile defense systems deployed on naval vessels and regional bases. These systems are designed to intercept incoming missiles or drones that could potentially target ships traveling through the strait. Modern destroyers equipped with advanced missile defense technology can track and neutralize airborne threats at long distances, providing an additional layer of protection for both military and civilian vessels operating in the area. This defensive capability is particularly important given the increasing use of drones and precision missiles in modern conflicts. The presence of multiple international naval forces operating in the same region adds both security and complexity to the situation. Warships from different countries must coordinate communication channels, navigation procedures, and operational rules to avoid misunderstandings or accidental confrontations. Military leaders emphasize constant communication and deconfliction measures to ensure that patrols, escort missions, and surveillance activities can continue smoothly without escalating tensions further. At the same time, the concentration of military power in such a small and strategically sensitive waterway highlights how critical the Strait of Hormuz has become in the broader geopolitical struggle over energy security and global trade routes. One of the most serious concerns surrounding tensions in the Strait of Hormuz is the possibility that the situation could evolve from a regional security crisis into a major global economic shock. Because the modern global economy depends heavily on stable energy supplies. Any prolonged disruption in oil transportation can create ripple effects that spread across financial markets, industries, and national economies. Energy is one of the most fundamental resources for modern society, powering transportation systems, manufacturing sectors, electricity generation, and international trade. When access to that energy becomes uncertain, economic systems across the world begin to react almost immediately. A blockade or severe disruption in the Strait of Hormuz would affect not only oil-producing countries in the Persian Gulf, but also the major economies that rely on their exports. Countries such as China, India, Japan, and South Korea import a significant portion of their oil from Gulf producers. If tanker shipments are delayed or reduced, these nations may face immediate supply concerns that could affect transportation networks, industrial production, and electricity generation. Governments may be forced to draw from emergency energy reserves, implement fuel rationing measures, or search for alternative suppliers in order to stabilize domestic markets. Such adjustments can be complicated and expensive, especially if global oil supplies tighten at the same time. The financial consequences of such a disruption could extend far beyond energy markets. Global stock exchanges often react strongly to geopolitical crises involving oil supply because higher energy costs increase operational expenses for businesses across many sectors. Industries such as aviation, shipping, manufacturing, agriculture, and logistics depend heavily on fuel, meaning their operating costs rise when oil prices surge. As businesses face higher expenses, those costs are frequently passed on to consumers through increased prices for goods and services. This chain reaction can contribute to inflation, which places additional pressure on households and governments alike. Another factor that could deepen the economic impact is uncertainty within global financial systems. Investors often respond to geopolitical instability by moving their assets towards safer investments, such as gold, government bonds, or stable currencies. This movement of capital can create volatility in currency markets and stock exchanges around the world. Emerging economies are often the most vulnerable in such situations because they depend heavily on imported energy and foreign investment to maintain economic growth. If oil prices remain elevated for an extended period, developing countries may struggle with rising import costs, weaker currencies, and increased debt pressure. The shipping and logistics industries could also face significant disruption if tensions in the Strait of Hormuz continue to escalate. A large portion of global trade relies on maritime transportation, and the Persian Gulf region serves as a key hub for energy shipments as well as other goods. If shipping companies consider the route too dangerous due to missile threats, naval confrontations, or maritime mines, they may delay shipments or search for alternative routes. These alternatives are often longer and more expensive, which can slow down supply chains and increase transportation costs for goods moving between continents. Energy importing nations may also begin competing with each other for alternative sources of oil and natural gas if supplies from the Persian Gulf become unreliable. Such competition can drive prices even higher and create diplomatic tensions as countries attempt to secure long-term energy contracts with producers outside the conflict zone. Energy producers in regions such as North America, Africa, and South America could experience increased demand, but ramping up production and transportation infrastructure often takes time. In the short term, global markets may struggle to compensate for the sudden loss of millions of barrels of oil that normally travel through the Strait of Hormuz each day. The broader geopolitical consequences could be equally significant. Rising fuel prices can influence domestic politics in many countries because energy costs affect transportation, food prices, and household expenses. Governments facing public pressure over rising living costs may be forced to adjust economic policies or increase subsidies to keep fuel affordable. At the same time, international organizations and major powers may intensify diplomatic efforts to stabilize the region and prevent further escalation, recognizing that a prolonged disruption in one of the world's most critical energy corridors could reshape global economic stability and geopolitical relationships.